Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are embarking today on what I think is an essential journey, really, a high-speed chronological look at something that fundamentally redefines what a battlefield even looks like now in the 21st century.
Absolutely. Because these conflicts today, they're not just about guns and tanks anymore, are they?
Not at all. It's about the relentless struggle for control over information, over algorithms, and those global narratives.
That's it. The idea of information warfare, I mean, it's ancient, right? Sun Tzu talked about it. But the speed of it now, the sheer scale and the complexity, it's just exploded in the last 60 years or so.
And that's exactly what we're tracking today, that evolution specifically within one of the world's most, well, strategically dynamic environments, Pakistan.
Yes. Our mission here is to really conduct a detailed analysis looking at how the Pakistan Army has continually adapted its media and information strategy. We're looking at it through the reigns of key military leaders and across these huge technological shifts.
And for this deep dive, we're drawing extensively from the work of Mr. Zaheer Ahmad Meer, specifically his research compiled in the book, The Generals of Pakistan.
Yeah, and it's really crucial, I think, to set the context of this source material for you, the listener. Mr. Meer's work, it presents a very focused, fact-based viewpoint, and it's inherently patriotic, looking at military leadership's role in nation building and protecting national morale.
So there's a clear perspective there.
There is, and the central theme, the thing that connects every single era we're about to dig into, is this core idea. Controlling the national narrative has always been seen as, well, a primary act of protecting the nation itself. By focusing on disseminating truth, as they define it, maintaining discipline, fostering unity, and doing that across whatever medium was available at the time, print, radio, TV, now digital.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because studying it chronologically really throws that adaptability into sharp relief, doesn't it? How did Pakistan's information strategy shift across these, really dramatic decades?
It's quite a story, moving from relying on, slow printing presses and maybe some regional radio static back in the 60s.
Right, very basic stuff by today's standards.
To now utilizing advanced deep learning AI for monitoring global social media platforms. It's just a spectacular demonstration of institutional learning, really, and strategic technological absorption.
It sounds like a continuous, very disciplined process.
It is. That's how the source frames it. Each era we examine is essentially a calculated response to whatever the dominant communications technology was at that time, but always, always keeping that core mission front and center.
Which is?
Defending Pakistan's truth, preserving unity, and ensuring national morale. That's the constant thread.
All right, let's start at the beginning, the foundational level. We're in the 1960s under Field Marshal Ayub Khan, and the focus technology back then. It was that highly centralized trio, wasn't it?
Yes, traditional state media. You had Radio Pakistan, which was huge, alongside government-influenced newspapers. That really defined what we can call the foundational print era.
In those early decades, I suppose those were the most reliable channels, and crucially, the most controllable.
Exactly. For mass communication, that was it. And the strategy underpinning it all was, well, pretty singular. Use state media primarily to forge and then enforce public unity.
So it was really an act of modern nation building, but done through centrally managed information flow.
Precisely. And the specific goal, as the source material lays out, wasn't just vague patriotism. It was about rallying public support, specifically under the banner of national development.
Ah, interesting. So media wasn't seen as entertainment, not primarily anyway, more like a crucial utility, like building roads or power grids.
Yes, exactly like that, driving shared economic and infrastructural goals across what was and is a very diverse population. You needed that common message.
To achieve those big targets, things like dam projects or industrial growth, which, let's face it, require shared sacrifice and focus.
You needed to standardize the message, a message of progress, of shared destiny. And this centralized messaging was vital for, counteracting potential fragmentation.
Like regional media popping up with different takes. Or local political resistance.
Absolutely. Things that could easily undermine the stability and the development efforts of a relatively young nation. You had to keep everyone on the same page.
It's just fascinating to think how different that media landscape must have felt.
Yeah.
Basically, one message, carefully curated, reaching out across the nation through just 2 or 3 main channels.
And the need for that kind of control, it really crystallized, didn't it, in the context of the post-1965 war.
Right. That conflict seems to have been a turning point for the strategic role of these outlets.
It really was. The sources specifically highlight that after the war, the focus became intense. Not just general news, but actively glorifying military courage and boosting what was likely quite damaged national morale.
Well, war always necessitates rigorous information control, doesn't it? You need to prevent panic, maintain public confidence in the armed forces.
And quickly translate military actions, successes, and failures sometimes into inspiring national narratives, mythologies even.
Can you elaborate a bit on the mechanism? How did that print strategy specifically achieve this goal of unity and boosting morale back then?
Well, according to the source, it was pretty meticulous. The insight here is that the state didn't just, ask for unity. It actively curated a specific national language of sacrifice and heroism.
How did they do that practically?
Things like creating standardized newsprint templates. These were distributed to provincial papers, ensuring that even if people were reading in Urdu or Sindhi or Punjabi, they all got the same core messages.
So consistency across languages.
Yes, and featuring dedicated columns of patriotic poetry, detailed and, let's be honest, probably often exaggerated front-page stories about individual acts of heroism, plus consistent unified updates on those big development projects, like the Turbella Dam, equating development with national strength, national victory.
So the key takeaway here, the lesson from this foundational era that carried forward, is that information was fundamentally aimed at building internal unity. It was very much an inward-facing strategy.
Absolutely. A strategy of cohesion designed to homogenize a diverse nation under that single flag of development, and after 65, military pride. Overwhelmingly domestic in its focus.
But that leads us straight to the limitations, doesn't it? The constraints of that era.
It does. Distribution and speed. A print-based strategy was inherently held back by things like literacy rates, which weren't universal.
And just the logistics of getting newspapers out across vast, sometimes difficult terrain.
Right. And critically, the speed of information delivery. If you're trying to manage a rapidly evolving national crisis, print media is incredibly slow.
There's that delay, isn't there? Between the event happening, the story being written, printed, distributed, and then people actually reading it. Hours, maybe days.
Exactly. You're dealing with very slow feedback loops. If news takes, say, 24 hours to reach most people, your ability to respond quickly or put out corrective messaging is minimal.
Radio Pakistan was faster, presumably.
It certainly had wider reach geographically and wasn't dependent on literacy. But print defined the official record. It allowed for deeper ideological penetration, perhaps. So the strategy was centered on this slow, consistent, almost authoritarian drip feed of unified national ideology, stability over speed.
Okay, so from print driving unity for development, we make this fundamental strategic leap. We move into the second major era, the ideological pivot under General Zia-ul-Haq.
And here we see the focus technology shift. Now it's about integrating radio, which was still important, with the incredibly powerful, even though it was nascent then, medium of television.
And TV was often introduced through state-run educational programming, wasn't it?
That's right. And this marks a profound, arguably irreversible strategic shift for the whole nation's information architecture. General Zia-ul-Haq fundamentally linked the state's information strategy with ideology. Explicitly.
So the narrative shifted. It moved beyond that more secular unity for development goal of Ayub Khan.
And transformed into something different. Unity defined by shared faith and cultural values. Islamization, essentially.
Right. The objective of the state narrative itself transitioned from economic progress to spiritual definition.
And the tools used reflected this ideological focus. The sources meticulously detail the widespread use of faith-based messaging, things like the introduction of standardized Islamic education TV programming.
And those patriotic anthems, the Milli Nagme, but composed specifically to carry a distinct ideological religious flavor.
Absolutely. And television, even in its limited early stages, often it was a TV set shared in a community center, or broadcasts were only for specific hours that offered an unprecedented visual and auditory impact that radio just couldn't match.
That visual element is key.
It is. The introduction of Islamic education programming on TV wasn't subtle. It was a powerful, direct mechanism to standardize and propagate these ideological principles right into the heart of the family unit, potentially.
So these broadcasts were almost like mandatory lessons in a specific kind of national identity,
Right.
moving far beyond just boosting morale.
Yes, much further. The outcome, as the sources describe it, was that these methods significantly strengthened the nation's perceived spiritual identity. It's framed as a form of cultural and moral engineering, explicitly aimed at defining who the nation is, both for people inside Pakistan and how it's seen externally.
So the defining insight of this era, then, is that media became this deliberate, state-controlled bridge, linking fundamental national belief, or at least the state-sanctioned version of it, with the overarching state structure.
That's a perfect way to put it. This strategy meant the state was asking for loyalty and alignment not just based on policy or development goals, but based on a shared, deeply held belief system, or one it was actively promoting.
Now, this raises a really important question, especially for listeners trying to track the political history here. How fundamentally different was this faith-based strategy from the more secular, development-focused unity goal of the Ayub era?
Oh, the differences are seismic, really fundamental. Ayub's era, focused on national development, was quite pragmatic, modernist in outlook, primarily economic and political in its pursuit of unity.
Get the dams built, get the factories running.
Basically. Whereas the Zia era strategy was identity-based, the unity being sought was theological and cultural. When you weave faith directly into the state's narrative machinery, as the source describes Zia doing so effectively,
You achieve a level of cohesion, perhaps, that simple political alignment can't match.
potentially, yes. It provides a kind of moral justification for the state's authority that secular development goals might lack. It taps into something deeper.
But surely an approach like that inherently carries significant long-term political implications. I mean, by defining the nation through one specific ideological lens, you inevitably create quite rigid boundaries, don't you, about who belongs, what constitutes acceptable political discourse.
That is the inescapable trade-off, isn't it? It's an incredibly powerful form of narrative control, no doubt. It utilizes the inherent reverence and authority associated with religious education to embed state messages.
And the key technology facilitator here was TV's visual authority, you're saying.
I think so. If a message is on a screen, especially back then, even one shared by a whole community, it just carries this weight of officialdom, an immediacy that even a widely distributed newspaper editorial might struggle to achieve. It was really the first step towards a visual mass-reach definition of a national ideology.
So it's that transition from a government telling you what to build to a government telling you who you are, and enforcing that through centralized educational media. That pivot seems crucial.
It really cemented ideological foundations that arguably continue to influence policy and public discourse decades later.
And the ability to standardize that visual presentation of authority, of doctrine across vast distances using the new medium of television, that was the strategic masterstroke that made it all possible.
Yes, that technological capability enabled the ideological shift.
Okay, so we've tracked the journey from unified print under Ayub through the ideological pivot to TV under Zia. Now we hit an era that genuinely blows the lid off the old communication infrastructure.
Yeah, this is the television revolution under General Musharraf. And the focus technology shifts dramatically again. Now it's all about the widespread emergence of private television channels and FM radio stations.
A total game changer. Because this cracks the state's monopoly on the airwaves, right?
Completely. And here's where it gets, as you said earlier, really interesting. This is the strategic paradox moment. It's something few states trying to execute narrative control ever attempt.
What was it?
General Musharraf enacted this major and frankly very controversial shift, media liberalization, starting around 2002. Remember, up until this point, the core strategy, whether focused on development or faith, had been control. Tight control over the message.
And suddenly the system was forced to open up.
Deliberately opened up, yes.
Yeah.
And the immediate results were, well, almost dizzying. You had dozens of private TV channels popping up, FM radio stations everywhere. It instantly fostered this culture of free media.
Which meant rapid-fire journalism, often quite heated national debate, live call-in shows.
Everything. It must have completely revolutionized and, frankly, probably terrified the traditional command and control communication style the Army was used to.
It seems like an existential challenge for the existing information apparatus. Suddenly, the state narrative has powerful, immediate competitors.
For the first time, yes. Multiple competing voices, different regional perspectives feeding in, and crucially, the capacity for outright criticism or political protest to be broadcast live instantaneously across the country.
Wow. So the military, which historically communicated via, authoritative monologue, controlled press releases.
Pretty much. Suddenly, they were forced to enter this high-stakes, perpetual dialogue, a conversation they couldn't fully control.
Now, The sources mentioned that this era was defined by the modern branding of the Army's image. Why did branding suddenly become so necessary for a traditionally quite reserved, disciplined institution?
That's a great question. It's because in this new, competitive, liberalized media environment, the institution itself became a subject of intense journalistic scrutiny, public discussion, political debate, not just the source of unchallengeable information anymore.
So it had to change how it presented itself.
It had to transition from an institution that merely dictates truth to one that has to actively persuade and frankly earn public trust every single day.
And branding, in this context, wasn't just about new logos or slogans.
Oh no, far beyond that. It meant actively managing public perception, communicating things like accessibility, high professionalism, showcasing operational successes, especially in the context of the war on terror, and demonstrating transparency. All in real time, often while facing some pretty acute political scrutiny on live TV.
So, the strategic paradox is crystal clear then. How do you maintain national security and stability objectives that historically relied on tight information control, while simultaneously introducing openness and live, often critical, public debate into that same ecosystem?
That is the ultimate tightrope walk. There's no easy answer. But the strategic realization, and this is really the key takeaway from this Musharraf era, was that maybe, just maybe, openness could actually be leveraged, used strategically to strengthen the institution's overall credibility in the long run.
How would that work? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, the thinking, as presented in the source, is that by creating a space for debate, by having spokespeople readily available to respond to tough questions, by transparently sharing information when possible, you signal confidence, professionalism, and that ultimately might generate far more sustainable public trust than rigid, old-fashioned censorship ever could.
The source frames this openness as a strategic win then, showing a confident institution adapting successfully.
Largely, yes. It acknowledges the turbulence, of course, the political crises, the judicial activism that was all happening. But it frames the military's strategic response, the shift in communication strategy, as a necessary and ultimately successful adaptation to that turbulence.
So the focus is less on the political chaos and more on the military's professional success in transforming how it communicated.
Exactly. It highlights how the Army adapted to this incredibly dynamic, competitive media environment, primarily by professionalizing its media wings, like the ISPR, and moving away from just passive information distribution.
Okay, so back to that adaptation. How exactly did the rise of all this private media force the Army to change its communication style, from that command and control monologue of the Ayub era to this more persuasive, modern branding approach?
Well, the change in personnel and the required skill set was fundamental. Command and control just requires someone to read a prepared statement clearly. Persuasion, though, that requires justification, evidence, rapid verbal agility.
Being good on your feet, basically.
Absolutely. The Army suddenly needed spokespeople who were genuinely adept at modern public relations. People capable of handling rapid-fire, often quite hostile questions, live on camera, and able to convey complex operational truths like the challenges of counterterrorism campaigns in difficult areas in ways that were digestible, televised sound bites.
It's that massive transition, isn't it, from controlling the message entirely because you own the pipes,
To actively managing the brand and navigating the ongoing debate because you can't stop the river of information anymore.
so you have to learn to sail faster and better than everyone else on that river.
That's a great analogy. Precisely. The strategic landscape just shifted dramatically. It wasn't a controlled, state-run lake anymore. It was a wild, fast-flowing river of 247 news cycles.
You couldn't build a dam.
So they had to master navigation. And this meant building proactive media wings, units that could anticipate negative stories, strategically release positive portrayals of the Army's role in national stability, disaster relief, and so on, and focusing heavily on projecting that image of cool, professional competence in every single television appearance.
We've covered a lot of ground. Slow print authority under Ayub, ideological TV shaping identity under Zia, the competitive chaos and branding demands of television liberalization under Musharraf. Now we arrive in the present.
Right, the digital command era, under the current leadership, Field Marshal General Asim Munir. And the tools here, well, they're almost unrecognizable from those previous eras.
They're talking social platforms, AI-driven monitoring, algorithms. It's moved entirely into Total fiber narrative management, hasn't it?
It really represents the largest and certainly the fastest technological and strategic leap in this entire 60-year journey we've been tracing. It fundamentally transforms information operations into what the sources explicitly term the digital narrative command era.
And what does that term signify?
It acknowledges a fundamental reality. The information space isn't just domestic anymore. It's globally interconnected. It's instantaneous. It's often anonymous or pseudonymous. And frankly, it requires machine intelligence just to keep track of it all, let alone police it.
Let's dive into the methods, because the technical detail here seems absolutely essential. You mentioned utilizing social platforms, leveraging AI for monitoring, and maintaining a focus on fact-based storytelling. The complexity of managing millions of interactions, data points per minute, it's staggering.
It is. Social platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, everything, they're the primary battleground now. Simply because narratives, both the ones you want to promote and the hostile ones you need to counter, spread and solidify their fastest, often bypassing traditional media gatekeepers entirely.
Straight to the public, unfiltered.
Exactly. But crucially, the sheer scale of content being created every second means that manual monitoring is utterly impossible, just completely futile.
Which is where the AI comes in.
This is why AI-driven monitoring becomes a non-negotiable strategic asset. You simply cannot operate effectively in this space without it.
We need to zoom in on the how of this AI monitoring, though. As the source describes it, it's not just tracking basic keywords or hashtags, is it? That seems too simple.
Oh, far from it. We're talking about sophisticated, advanced, deep learning models, and they're designed to achieve multiple, quite complex goals simultaneously.
Such as?
Okay, first, identifying coordinated sentiment manipulation. The AI has to be smart enough to distinguish between organic public opinion bubbling up and artificially manufactured trends pushed by bots or coordinated groups designed to look like popular opinion.
Spotting the fakes, basically.
Yes. Second, it needs to trace the origins of hostile narratives. Can it identify patterns suggesting non-human bot activity? Can it link coordinated campaigns back to specific foreign IP ranges, potentially flagging state-level disinformation campaigns aimed at destabilizing the country or degrading military morale?
That's sophisticated stuff. And yet, the necessity for fact-based storytelling remains critical, you said. Why? When disinformation seems to spread so easily online, why is sticking to the truth still the cornerstone of this digital strategy?
It's a really important point, because in the digital age, credibility is probably your most perishable asset. Digital falsehoods, especially blatant ones, are often very easily and rapidly debunked by citizen journalists, by independent fact-checkers, by competing news sources.
And once you're caught lying,
your credibility is shot, potentially permanently. The digital narrative command seems to recognize that long-term strategic success relies on establishing and maintaining an authoritative voice, one built on verifiable facts, even if the deployment of those facts needs to be almost instantaneous to counter a lie before it goes viral.
And this brings us to the global mission aspect, which is explicitly defined now. The goal isn't just internal unity anymore, like in Ayub's time.
No, the goal now is defending Pakistan's image globally. Munir's era is focused squarely on external credibility and defending against global, often algorithmically driven misinformation campaigns.
That change of scope seems to define this entire era.
It does. The threat is no longer perceived as being contained within national borders or limited to domestic political arguments. The threat is seen as coming from hostile state actors, foreign-based non-state groups, automated bot networks, all targeting Pakistan's reputation, its security, its economy on a world stage, and often deliberately exploiting existing internal fault lines.
So the key takeaway for this current era is definitive. Digital truth, or at least the rapid dissemination of a fact-based narrative, is now positioned as the new strategic weapon.
Yes, requiring constant vigilance and increasingly advanced technology. The accuracy and credibility of information is being treated as strategically equivalent to physical border security.
But what's really fascinating here, as you mentioned, is the sheer necessity driving the shift to AI monitoring. It wasn't just a nice-to-have.
Not at all. The sheer volume and velocity of digital information, I mean, just think about the torrent of tweets, posts, videos, comments every minute. It means that realistically, only algorithms can even hope to patrol these digital borders effectively.
Humans just can't keep up.
No chance. If you're dealing with coordinated, foreign-backed misinformation campaigns designed to destabilize the country or degrade morale, a purely human, manual response is simply too slow and too susceptible to being completely overwhelmed by the noise and the scale.
So this is where we really define cyber sovereignty in the context of the source material. It's that leap from just monitoring domestic news to actively defending against global digital threats.
Exactly. For the purpose of this analysis, cyber sovereignty essentially means the strategic ability to try and enforce national interests, maintain narrative control, and defend against attacks within these global digital spaces, effectively treating the internet as a kind of virtual territory that needs defending, just like physical borders.
And the scale of the threat necessitates the scale of the technology.
Precisely. The Digital Narrative Command, therefore, isn't just tasked with posting positive content or rebutting false stories. It's moving towards predictive defense, trying to identify potential threats before they gain traction, before they trend.
And ensuring that Pakistan's perspective, its truth, is the most visible, the most credible story available across all these diverse global platforms, from niche microblogs right up to international news aggregators.
That seems to be the strategic objective. This
Yeah.
is really the apex of the evolution we've been tracing. We're at a point where sophisticated technology doesn't just enable the strategy anymore.
It dictates the strategic requirements themselves. You must have this tech to even play the game.
Exactly.
That journey we've just traced,
Wow.
from the printing press to the algorithm, is really an incredible case study in strategic adaptation and technological absorption over decades.
It really is. Let's maybe quickly review those signposts again, just to crystallize the evolution for the listener.
Good idea. So we started with Ayub Khan back in the 60s. The focus then was squarely on print unity. Simple message, tightly controlled, inward focused, all geared towards national development projects.
Then came Zia-ul-Haq, and with him, that decisive ideological pivot, using radio and especially early TV to standardize a faith-based narrative, really trying to define the spiritual identity of the nation from the top down.
Then Musharraf took that unexpected gamble, focusing on television liberalization. Suddenly, the military had to learn the art of branding, of persuasion, of building credibility through structured, often challenging public dialogue on dozens of new channels.
And finally, we land in the current era under Field Marshal Munir, the focus now firmly on digital sovereignty, recognizing that the modern battlefield requires absolute mastery of AI, global social platforms, and algorithmic warfare to defend national truth and stabilize the information environment.
And look at the technical tools. They shifted so radically
Yeah.
from, manual typeset and crackly radio waves.
To shared coaxial cables carrying the first TV signals, then broadcast airwaves.
And finally landing on Wi-Fi signals, fiber optics, and machine learning algorithms, tracking literally trillions of data points across the globe.
But what's really fascinating, I think, is the unifying constant that runs through all of this. Despite those constantly changing tools, the sources are absolutely clear on this point.
Which you think?
That the overarching purpose, the core mission, remains identical across all these eras. It is always about defending Pakistan's truth, preserving national morale, and promoting a positive image both internally and increasingly globally.
So they're just using the specific language and leveraging the unique capabilities and navigating the limitations of whatever medium happens to be dominant at that particular moment in history.
That's exactly it. While the platform changed dramatically, print, radio, TV, digital, those core strategic goals of unity, integrity, faith in the nation's destiny, they were simply translated into the most effective communication style for the new medium.
That's the big picture then. The strategy reflects this continuous, highly intelligent, and often quite proactive adaptation. It doesn't sound like they just waited to be overwhelmed by new media platforms.
No, the narrative in the source suggests a pattern of strategic assessment, adoption, and then attempts at mastery. That willingness to innovate, whether it was grappling with the challenge of a free, competitive media landscape in the 2000s, or facing the current challenge of global algorithmic disinformation, it shows this persistent institutional commitment to narrative defense as a core security function.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, watching global events unfold today? What's the takeaway?
I think the sources demonstrate very clearly how modern military strategy, and indeed national security strategy more broadly, must now fully integrate the mastery of algorithms and digital platforms. It has to be done just as rigorously as mastering conventional weaponry or tactical deployment on the ground. It's not optional anymore.
It means that every nation, really, and maybe even every large institution operating in this global sphere, has to recognize that its digital footprint, its command over its own narrative online, that's now an inseparable part of its strategic defense profile.
Absolutely. The ability to monitor effectively, to counter hostile narratives swiftly, and perhaps most importantly, to rapidly establish a credible, fact-based narrative of your own in that chaotic digital space. It's no longer a luxury, is it? It's non-negotiable for maintaining sovereignty and stability in the 21st century.
So the evolution of Pakistan's media strategy, as laid out in the Generals of Pakistan, serves as this almost textbook example of that principle in action over 60 years. The medium changes every decade, sometimes faster.
But the mission to control and project the narrative of national truth persists, constantly adapted and arguably strengthened by each new wave of technology. Hashtag outro.
Well, this deep dive has certainly taken us on a breathtaking journey, from the slow, steady, authoritative rhythm of the printing press.
Right up to the instantaneous, often invisible algorithmic management of global perception. The sheer discipline required to maintain, or at least attempt to maintain, a consistent national message across 60 years of such radical technological disruption is truly remarkable when you lay it out like this.
And we close by reinforcing those core values that seem embedded in the strategy across all these different eras, as highlighted in Mr. Meer's analysis: truth, unity, and faith.
Those appear to be the constants, yes. The bedrock, if you will, upon which these constantly shifting technological strategies are built and, importantly, justified.
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to perhaps mull over.
We've traced how the defense of truth, as defined by the state, has moved. It started as a purely human process: editorial decisions, dissemination choices. Now it's increasingly reliant on the predictive power, the pattern recognition of advanced AI monitoring systems.
So the question becomes, when national vigilance, the protection of the narrative, is increasingly outsourced to technology like this, designed to manage disagreement and counter disinformation at machine scale, what happens? Does that technological intervention ultimately aid genuine national unity?
Or does it simply become a vastly more sophisticated, perhaps less visible tool? A tool to manage, contain, and maybe even suppress the expression of fundamental disagreements within society?
A compelling and slightly unsettling question to ponder, indeed, as we all navigate this rapidly evolving landscape of cyber sovereignty and digital information control.
It certainly is.
Until the next deep dive, we leave you with that powerful affirmation from our source material: Pakistan Zindabad.